We're good to go?
Yes, Chair, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Scottish Police Authority People Committee. I'm delighted that so many of you can join us. If I could just go through some housekeeping and some arrangements and some explaining of rationale, if you may. So, although I've not asked Paul, but if I drop off the call, if Paul could step in and chair the meeting until I get reconnected. Welcome to our colleagues from HMICS, staff associations and trade unions. You always make our committee meetings provide an in-depth perspective, which makes our meetings richer. So thank you very much. But for first-time attendees and for those attending on a regular basis, just the clarity of when papers are presented, we'll take initial comments and questions from SPA members. I'll then bring in staff association and trade union members who may give a perspective. They'll not be asking questions, but they can give a perspective, and then members can pick up anything that has come from there. We have apologies from Alistair Hay. Unfortunately, at the last minute, he has another authority commitment. I have no declarations of interest. If that's the same, then none notified in advance. So I'm moving then on to the public minute from the 14th of November. Are people content that that is accurate? I'll take that as a yes. And from the 27th of November, people also content. Okay. Now, I think, and if we can move on to the rolling action log with the matters arising and recognise that it's probably a good thing to go back at the end of the meeting just to check that we've had everything. Is there? So if I quickly go through, if we go through the Your Voice Matters, this proposed ongoing, so we'll get an update at our next committee meeting. The wellbeing report, we clearly have the very important HMICS frontline focus inspection, and that will be scooped into other wellbeing issues that are already being discussed, so that's ongoing. So the 003, the Policing Together meeting chaired by ACC Duncan, when that was process of detailing short, medium and long-term measures, because we were looking at the impact of activity and outcomes. I'm not persuaded that we've got that. I'm not sure if others wish to suggest that we have in a way that is measurable and tangible and can demonstrate impact. I wonder if we want to keep that open till the end of the meeting and then and not propose to close it, and then we can have a sense check of it at the end of the meeting. Similarly, the Sex Equality and Tackling Misogyny, Police Scotland to ensure performance measures capture all activity and progress and evidence of impact. I'm not sure that we're necessarily seeing that either. But again, we can take that through the meeting and have another look at it at the end of the meeting. Surefire, what we're saying is we want progress. I'm not sure that we've got a date, but again, I'd like to keep that open until we have the discussion. And what I'd be looking for is evidence of when all of this will be implemented, either that or be advised that there's no longer a risk. And Your Safety Matters is ongoing. So the next one we have for closing is the 14th of November 2023, reviewing feedback from members. Yeah, so we got that, a very helpful ongoing dialogue with you all, and that was helpful. So that is closed. The L&D strategy has been paused. I'm not sure that we necessarily, it would be helpful to understand. Can anyone advise on, so that was supposed to come to this meeting, it's not. And if we were closing it, I'm worried that we would just lose this. Can someone help me understand what's happening with L&D strategy? No. Okay, well, we'll keep that open, please, and it would be helpful to have a briefing note post committee, but it would be helpful to bring that forwards, at least for an understanding to the committee about how this is going to be, how this is going to take place. Training, a briefing paper was provided, so I think what we were saying is what was happening with mandatory and statutory training, so how many people had completed their mandatory and statutory training. It would be helpful also to have a briefing on the fact that it's been agreed, statutory and mandatory being slightly different. So I didn't find the paper that was given to us giving us that assurance. Are people content that that's the case, or does someone think that we have been briefed on how many officers and staff actually have completed, or the percentage have completed their statutory and mandatory? We're maybe needing to do a bit of offline work with officials to agree, because there's probably a comprehensive approach to this, whereas we could agree a way forward so that we can get the assurance of all the putting together all the work that's taking place. Ill health retirement, I think we're closing it because it should then slip into the ongoing reporting arrangements, and we can pick up in the report the learning and the evidence that we're getting of, particularly enduring duty, but other ill health retirement. Are there anything we can do to prevent? And we've got the recruitment and protected characteristic impact report, which is coming later on in the agenda. So that looks as though closure is reasonable. Is there anything members want to raise on any of that, or will we move forwards? Okay, so we can pick that up at the end. Karen, particularly, I'll forget, if you wouldn't mind reminding me at the end that we have to do that. So decision, are people content in accordance with section 20 of SPA standing orders that we agree that take the agenda items in private that we have noted? Okay, so just for the avoidance of doubt, the running order of the private session, oh right, sorry, it's not the running order of the, so the running order of the agenda. We're going to postpone, unfortunately, HMIS inspector can't manage to be here with us, and whilst we have Police Scotland team who can speak to this very encouraging report, I think we always find the external assurance of outside inspectors adds a richness to our debate, so we've decided to postpone that to the next meeting. If I may take item 2.3 first, because I don't know that we've got Katrina Casper, but Katrina Stewart from the Policing Together Oversight Group is here today, and I promised she would get away promptly, and you've heard that Katrina's moved her other meetings around, and Mary Pitkethley was going to attend, but she also has some urgent SPA business that she has to attend to. And then finally, before I hand over to our HMICS colleagues, for the private session, Staff Association Trade Unions join us for items up to and including 8.1. I'm then going to swap items 9 and 10, as items 9 is for members only. So that's how I see the next few hours rolling out. I will give us a break after about an hour and a half or 2 hours, just to stretch our legs and take a comfort break. So, Mark and Tina, are we handing over to you in terms of the review of culture in Police Scotland?
Good morning, Chair. Yes, it'll be myself. Am I okay to proceed?
Of course, please do. Yes.
Thank you. Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to come here and present this report. This report is probably one of the most significant, both in terms of the size, scale and scope that we have covered in recent years. It took probably, I think, 12 months in total, involved a significant team of people in the production of this, but was led by Tina Yule, who's on the call today. So the aim originally of the thematic inspection was to make an assessment as to whether Police Scotland has a healthy organisational culture and ethical framework, and whether the appropriate values and behaviours are consistently lived across the organisation. We had originally included within the scope of the inspection vetting. However, given the early findings, we decided that vetting warranted a standalone inspection, and of course that was siphoned off and published in autumn of 2023 and led by a separate lead inspector, Maggie Pettigrew. And I know there's a lot of work ongoing in terms of that just now. So as with other inspections, the work was developed in line with our EFQM principles in terms of the methodology that we used, and it was split into three main areas. These were leadership and vision, delivery and outcomes, so essentially the why, the what and the how. As with previous and recent inspection work, we asked Police Scotland to do a self-evaluation of where it saw itself in terms of organisational culture, and we used the return from that work to inform the rest of the fieldwork. That was quite a significant piece of fieldwork, as we wanted to get as broad a scope of feedback as possible across the organisation. So we went to 3 territorial divisions across the country. So we went to Northern Division, Greater Glasgow Division and Fife, and we also
Now either I've frozen or Mark's dropped off.
I can hear you, Chair, so I think it's
Right, so
Mark who's
Mark.
dropped off. Yeah.
Well, maybe Tina, will we wait for Mark to rejoin us? And in the time that we're waiting for Mark, Katharina Casper, who's Chair of Complaints and Conduct, and Jane Ryder, who's a member of a board member who is a member of Policing Together, have also joined us to be part of this conversation, and they are more than welcome to continue for the rest of the People Committee, should they have the time. I hope Mark knows he's dropped off. I'm going to, Katie, I'll skip over your agenda item in terms of the wellbeing report, if I may, and I'm making the bold assumption that, Jackie, your report will not take quite as long. Can you talk us through or highlight anything on the Ill Health Retirement Review Closure Report?
Of course, Chair, I'm happy to do so.
Unless that's Mark coming back.
We'll just wait for Mark.
Yes,
okay.
Yes. Okay. Right. Mark, welcome back. We missed you.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies, I don't know what happened there.
Don't worry.
So yeah, I'm not sure where we got to before the screen froze and I was kicked out, but just going through the kind of methodology in terms of the field work, as I said, we looked across the country, specialist functions and corporate functions, and we also used an online contact form for which Tina will keep me right in the numbers, but it was 650 responses there or thereabouts, I believe, with an optional anonymity option there, so that people could report their experience of organisational culture to us. However, we did offer up the option for a follow-up interview, for which, of course, people would have to provide their details, and certainly many people took us up on that option. And in fact, I think we had to kind of narrow down so we could undertake a number of those follow-up interviews. But excluded from the scope, and I suppose this is quite important because of the size and scope and scale of it, and we were also conscious that, of course, there was an independent review group looking at specifically ED&I issues, I beg your pardon, and while, of course, we would address that if they come up in our fieldwork, we were conscious that we didn't want to overlap too much, and that the work should complement the work of the independent review group that was done within Police Scotland. Notwithstanding that, so in terms of the scope, we didn't training and development, and of course some of these were subject of previous inspection work, and some will be subject of, in fact, current and future inspection work, and in fact most of those issues were raised, as I want to talk about, as inhibitors to a positive workplace culture. So In terms of the general findings, what we did find is a general consensus that Police Scotland is on a journey of change and improvement and heading in a more positive direction than previously, and that the culture was dramatically different from the early days of Police Scotland. And certainly that's my own personal experience, as well as what we were told through the field work. I think Police Scotland, in terms of the work of the IRG, as the previous chief and the current chief has already acknowledged that there remain culture and behavioural issues which can result in unfair and inequitable treatment in the service. And we were told about this from a number of people in individual cases such as treatment, and have taken that related policy processes and procedural matters into account in our findings within the report. The general feeling was a perception of a lack of organisational justice, and that was reflected in much of the evidence that we collected. So in terms of those kind of 3 areas that I talked about of our EFQM methodology, leadership first, what we found and what we were told was there was a historical lack of investment and deprioritisation of leadership and people skills training. And we know that was partially to do with the kind of COVID pandemic, but even prior to that, and that's negatively impacted on the overall leadership culture within Police Scotland. There's a swathe of sort of sergeants, inspectors, etc., who have been missing and haven't had that leadership training, which has been afforded before and now since. And of course, there's now a management development programme in place, and I appreciate that as at early stages in terms of evaluation. More positively, divisional commanders, on-call supervisors and first and second line managers were viewed very positively in terms of their leadership behaviours and role modelling by the majority of those that we spoke to, but we did find a clear disconnect in management style and behaviours between the senior and middle frontline managers. We also looked specifically at the probationary experience to see how that differed from officers coming into the service and then once they joined the operational environment. And what we found was, certainly on joining and within the college, really strong sense of clear motivation on joining. The values and expectations we found differed from the classroom to the operating environment in terms of there was a real feeling of inclusivity, challenge and well-being, which was a focus at the college, but maybe less valued at the front line. And also the probationers felt ill-equipped for the demands of frontline policing based on the training they received, specifically relating to dealing with vulnerability and mental health demand. And I know that the current chief has reflected on that as recently as last week in terms of the role that the policing has and will undertake. So moving on to the key findings in terms of the delivery aspect, the policing style and tone is something that we found quite a lot of, and we found really good practice in terms of large and major events, and the policing of the COVID pandemic demonstrated really good practice in setting a clear organisational policing style and tone. But what we did find, though, was inconsistencies in the default style and tone of policing, and a bit of a disconnect between clear instructions on events and operations when officers would be told exactly what the style and tone would be, and that kind of day-to-day, going out to police the streets of Scotland. So moving on then to kind of HR and processes, I know that will be touched on in a future inspection, but it certainly came up quite a bit in terms of the perception that we found from feedback that it lacked openness, transparency and fairness and a pace of resolution, and that there was a general lack of trust in these processes, and these will be explored further in future inspections. The concerns also centred around a lack of understanding of the processes by managers and their role in the process. I know that's been borne out in kind of high-profile instances in the past. So moving on now to the key findings in relation to outcomes, we found that Police Scotland does not yet fully understand how culture affects service delivery performance, relying on service satisfaction ratings to assess this currently, and it doesn't yet measure cultural change in a way that I think we would like to see, and the impact of any supporting activity to influence that. We also found that there's clear evidence that the well-being within Police Scotland is affected by the elements of policing culture, albeit pride in policing is still very much to the fore and strong. We did identify positive workforce motivation, particularly at a local and team level, and that all of that is explored further by the ongoing inspection and well-being, which is nearing completion. So in total, we made 11 recommendations, and typically what we would do is ask for an action plan to address those recommendations. And we have been engaging with Police Scotland throughout this process of publication. And that action plan is typically received within 3 months, although the engagement with Police Scotland, they've asked for an extension to that, and we've agreed to that. So we expect that action plan to be received in the next probably 6 to 8 weeks, I would imagine. But just to touch on a couple of the recommendations, and then happy to open up for questions, Chair, myself and Tina. The recommendation 1, which actually touches on previous inspections in terms of leadership training development, which is that Police Scotland should improve leadership behaviours across the organisation to ensure that officers and staff work in a culture that is supportive, collaborative, and welcomes challenge. And that reflects back to what I was saying about the kind of the deprioritisation, I should say, of leadership training in previous years. Recommendation 2 is this is also an emerging theme within our wellbeing inspection, which is that Police Scotland should develop and deliver a set of actions to address the fundamental inequalities between officers and police staff and frontline policing and other national or specialist functions. And in terms of the role of probationary officers and their readiness for the demands of frontline policing, is that the Police Scotland should ensure that the training syllabus is more reflective of the actual frontline demand. So just touching on then recommendation 6 and going back to what we found about policing style and tone, which is a real positive in certain areas, to try and reinforce that human rights and ethics based approach for all policing activities, not just specifically large and major events. And then finally, the recommendation I wanted to just tease out was that the authority of Police Scotland should put in place measures to monitor progress against the areas for development outlined in this report, and ensure regular public reporting to allow assessment of progress in this key area. Chair, that was the main areas that I wanted to tease out in the report. Clearly, it's quite a significant report, and I'm sure everyone will have read it, but certainly happy to take any questions, and I'm sure Tina is too. Thank you.
Mark, thank you very, very much indeed. It was helpful to have the colour added on to the document we've had, and as you say, very, very important, and is going to be, I think, incredibly helpful for moving forwards. So I've got Michelle, then Katrina. Michelle?
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks for the report, and really welcome the positive aspects of it. So that's really encouraging, but there's still clearly a long way to go in terms of addressing the fundamental issue. One of my concerns is, I think there's a reference under the key findings, and I think you mentioned it in your presentation, about the impact on progress, the potential negative impact on progress of a lack of resources. And I am actually really, and I accept, that resources are constrained, and that there may well be many things that you could do that would be beneficial that may well depend on resources. But I am concerned, that we're saying that if you don't have the resources, you can't address the issues that we're looking at in terms of discrimination and misogyny, etc. Because I think that just becomes an excuse, because there's never going to be a time when we've got all the money that we need and we're going to be able to do everything that we aspire to do, and therefore the change in culture will derive from that. And I think that's a really dangerous road to go down. So I'm slightly concerned about the emphasis on that, because it kind of almost gives us an excuse. So, for example, you make reference to a lack of, or a perceived lack of, organisational justice. Addressing organisational justice doesn't depend on significant or indeed any resources. You talk about a perceived sense that the senior executive team isn't as cohesive as it kind of would like to be, or that people would like to. Again, that cohesion, that positive working together, collaboration amongst senior officers does not depend on resources. A real concern, and I think this is quite a core issue really for me, and probably for officers and staff, is that feedback, and indeed potentially not very positive feedback, is welcomed in terms of senior officers' approach, but when it happens, it isn't actually very welcome, or it isn't responded to in a very positive way. And all that does is stop people from providing that feedback. And again, a response to feedback, a positive response to feedback, does not require resources. So I suppose there's an awful lot of things that we both can and must do that don't depend on resources. So I'm just be really concerned that we don't focus the issue of resources too much on, or make the improvements dependent on the availability of resources.
Okay, Mark, anything?
Yeah. Furiously agreeing with you there, Michelle, in terms of, you know, certainly the behaviours and values of people shouldn't matter whether there's 1 or 16,000 officers in Police Scotland, because the key values of integrity, fairness, respect for others absolutely shouldn't. It's not dependent on policing numbers. In terms of the resources, and Tina may wish to come in on the back of this. What we found was that perceived lack of what we call, you know, fairness, organisational justice, was the inequality of treatment of officers. So frontline and specialist areas. So, for example, securing time off to improve and maintain well-being, much more difficult at the front line than specialist areas or corporate areas. And that reflects back into the work that again, Tina led on strategic workforce planning and the setting of a target operating model to ensure that there is parity of treatment across the organisation for officers and staff who work in different quality of environments, who are able to secure time off or otherwise in different areas of the business. But in terms of the actual the core issues that you mentioned there, Michelle, I completely agree that should absolutely not be dependent on policing or staffing numbers, which is that ability to challenge, that ability to listen, the ability to treat and behave in a way which, you know, the public and Police Scotland would expect officers and staff to behave in. So the resource constraints do impact on certain elements of culture, but certainly not the kind of key core behavioural elements. I would totally agree with that. Tina, is there anything you wanted to add in terms of that?
I think I would just want to say that whilst again I don't disagree about it not being dependent, there is no doubt in my mind, and our findings bear this out, and I think they will in wellbeing as well, is that resourcing is a causal factor in a lot of these findings, that the pressure on individuals and teams actually impacts on their attitude towards a lot of these cultural aspects and their ability to respond, both in terms of their personal willingness, but also in terms of their actual capacity on the ground. There's no doubt in my mind that behaviours are influenced by the resource pressures that are placed on these individuals. So I think we can't discount it as a factor. It shouldn't necessarily be a factor in addressing it, though I suspect Katie would probably say that, you know, all of this will take resources from her point of view to address those recommendations. So I think it's not just as simple as drawing a straight line between the two and saying that that's not a direct influence. It is a causal impact. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Michelle, do you want to come back on that point?
Yes, please. So I agree with that. So I understand it. I suppose, though, I would remain concerned that we leave too much of the improvement capacity and possibility, resting on that. And at the end of the day, you know, this is not an issue that has arisen since the resources have become very, very constrained. This is the result of a long-standing, ongoing organisational culture that originated when resources really, frankly, were never an issue. So I suppose, you know, there is that kind of perspective as well. Let's not forget that this has grown and continued over a period when resources were much more readily available. So I just, you know, want to continue to be wary about that as a reason.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. Katrina?
Yes, thank you. First of all, I only actually got the invitation to attend today and notice of the paper yesterday, so I haven't read it in as much detail as I would like to. I'm certainly going to go away and do so. My first reaction is it's a really, really important piece of work, obviously, and it's really, really welcome to see it. I think it'll be an incredibly useful tool going forwards, or reference going forwards, I should say. I also sit on the legal committee and the complaints and conduct committee, and I think my membership of both those committees helps to inform some of my immediate reaction. But I did want to say, and Tina, notwithstanding what you've just said, and I wanted to back up Michelle's comment and say, in my experience, albeit on a much smaller scale than an organisation the size of Police Scotland, resources, of course, are absolutely crucial. but to build a values-based organisation, it really is, it requires more than anything. It requires mindfulness, understanding, and a will to make the changes required, or to create the culture that you're seeking. I suppose my question is really around, I'm curious about the emphasis that you have made, and thanks very much for the narrative, Mark. Really, that's been really helpful. Talk a lot about the training of new recruits not reflecting, the realities of frontline policing. I'm curious whether you feel, or you registered, whether recruits coming out of training, how equipped they are to distinguish between realities of frontline policing and the realities of custom and practice that they may be met with in terms of old-fashioned ways of policing, if you like, or old-fashioned perspectives. So, for example, the chair here has often raised the issue of talking about people as custodies rather than people. Some of the language, for example, that's still very embedded in the practice. And I wonder whether you think new recruits coming into the job feel equipped to challenge where they feel perhaps uncomfortable about what they are witnessing when it comes to frontline policing, or to challenge a culture within a team where they may feel very vulnerable as a female or a Black person or a person of colour or someone with a disability. So I wondered if you could maybe speak to that, if at all possible.
Certainly, Katrina, I can answer that, and if there's any more detail, maybe Tina could come in. So in terms of our findings, certainly the values and the willingness to challenge was absolutely espoused as a key component of the training received at the police college. So prior to, if you like, leaving to deploy onto the streets and communities of Scotland, that learning, if you like, was there, and that readiness and willingness to challenge was there. What we were finding was that it was less well received when it was actually implemented on the streets, maybe for the reasons that you mentioned. So I think what we did was we took a number of probationers who were still at the college, and of course that was one set of findings, and then we wanted to speak to them after they deployed onto the street for a period of time to find out how that training interacted with the realities of policing at the front line of the communities of Scotland. So yeah, certainly the willingness to challenge, I think, is probably there. The readiness with which that challenge was received is perhaps not quite at the same level at this point in time. So that was certainly our findings, and whether that has dissuaded the probationers to continue on that path, I don't know. We didn't probably get to that stage. Tina can maybe correct me on that if I'm mistaken, but that maybe requires some follow-up work. But certainly in terms of that kind of desire and that motivation to still do the right thing was certainly, we found, still evident. But I think once the kind of willingness to challenge is counteracted, then it's perhaps diminishing as time goes on. Yeah.
And that would also, sorry, thank you for that. No, but that would also tie in very much with the Durham research findings, which is that it's the lower level management people who actually probably need the most support, who are actually the most vulnerable in a sense to all the pressures that we've already discussed. So thank you. Sorry, you were going to pass over to Tina.
Yeah, Tina, is there anything you want to add to that?
No, that's fine, Mark. Thanks.
That's great. Thanks, Katrina. And I think the encouraging piece is it's there, it's palpable within the organisation, and that then means we can build on that and move it forwards. But Paul, then Katrina.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I thought it was a really interesting read. There's so much in this, and actually the timing of it is, considering we've got an incoming or recently incoming Chief Constable, I think it's the timing of it is perfect for her, because we'll have a sense of what needs to be sorted out within the organisation vis-a-vis culture to take us on. And then, of course, this is a moving feast, because, say, over 5 years, there's massive cultural improvement. There'll still need to be even more, because it's a constantly evolving kind of area of work. The bit I'm interested in, though, is you make a reference to a clear disconnect in management style and behaviours between senior and middle frontline managers. And actually a leitmotif running through this report is disconnects between people coming out of or people coming out of college and going into the front line, and there's a kind of disconnect in what they're taught there and what they experience in their first few years. They kind of park some of the more positive values. I don't know if that's the clumsy way of putting it, but there does seem to be a sequence of disconnects throughout the organisation. And I wonder if you could expand on certainly the one about management style and behaviours.
Yep, certainly I don't mind taking that, Paul. So I think probably the best way to do it is to provide an example of what I think we're trying to say there. So when we did our research and spoke to certainly middle senior line managers, there was the expectation, for example, that one-to-ones would be being held, development conversations would be being held. Then when we spoke to first line managers themselves, so they themselves hadn't had those one-to-one conversations, but the expectation was that they would undertake them. But of course, the resourcing pressures that excuse me, myself and Tina alluded to meant that the capacity to actually have those types of conversations weren't there because of the demands of policing. So that disconnect in terms of what, if you like, operational frontline, first line managers, second line managers are expected to do isn't aligned with the capacity to actually undertake that level of probably proactivity that's being found. So that's where the disconnect is perhaps evident, and we were told about. Tina, is that a fair reflection of what you were told?
Yes, and I think there's kind of a general point there, Paul, about I think you would find this in any large organisation, that, you know, once you get to the very kind of, you know, senior levels in the organisation, there's always a perceived disconnect with the reality of actually what's going on the ground. But there are ways of, you know, constantly checking in, whether it's being physically present and being visible to the front line, but it's also attitudinal and behaviour as well, changes as you get more senior in the organisation. And I think the pressures on those senior managers are very, very significant.
Yeah.
And their visibility and their connectedness with middle management, particularly where a lot of the pressures exist, you know, top down and bottom up, were really, really visible in terms of their attitudes towards, you know, everything, as Mark says, from one-to-ones to time for development to, you know, any kind of, you know, major aspect of policing, basically, that the attitudes change, you know, other than the core values, which we did find very kind of uniform throughout the organisation. The priorities all change, you know, as we kind of move through the ranks. So I think that disconnect can be addressed in some ways. But I think we're realistic that, you know, it is a traditional feature of most hierarchical organisations that this happens.
Yeah, no, thanks very much for that. I was going to ask about how this would compare with other hierarchical organisations, and certainly the guy digging the street, for example, has very little in common with the council chief executive in terms of their philosophical thinking many times, and it's the necessary aspect of management and chief executives that are doing that. But a lot of this doesn't sound like it's rocket science to sort out, though. If it's one-to-ones is the principal way of doing it, it's just simply a matter of giving them enough time and space, and of course that does take resources, you point out. Well, thanks very much for that, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Paul, and you know, your helpful comment about the sortability of this, and therefore having, you know, good report, thorough report that, you know, we can all, or Police Scotland can move on with. Katrina.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, colleagues, for this report. Absolutely fascinating read, and similar to Katrina, I'm still digesting the finer detail of it, but I think the report itself, the summary, and kind of the discussion which we've been having today, I find that incredibly encouraging because, you know, again, when I think about the model of organizational culture, which is where the values and the beliefs are kind of the bottom part of the iceberg, and at the top of it, you've got the behaviors, which are the ones where the culture ultimately manifests itself. And you know, and I think some of the things in the report jumped out at me in terms of there are actually some specific behaviors that can be worked on. So when it comes to addressing cultural change, taking us right back to, is it resource? What is it that's required? But actually, I think the focus on tackling specific behaviors, which are influenced by the culture, but which also in return drive the culture. I almost feel like that is our best kind of bet, is being very, very specific about certain behaviors that we see coming out as a consequence of some of the development areas that you've identified. So I suppose probably just a comment from me rather than a question. I am very encouraged to have this information, and I will be very, very encouraged to see what the action plan will look like, because I think, to me, really at the core of this is changing some very specific behaviors, and then hopefully starting to see the ripple effects of it into the culture as well. So thank you very much for this very, very, very good piece of work.
Okay, thanks, Katharina. If I'm not Tom.
Thank you, and like others, Nicole, hugely welcome this report. It's so timely, helpful. Now, work within the oversight group for policing together, it would be absolutely core reference for us. But what would be really important is the action plan and the response to that action plan coming from it, and specifically within. Accepting this won't be an easy fix in terms of timescales, etc. But prioritisation and pace are going to be absolutely crucial here, and it's just really to make that point in terms of that action plan and the HMICS's view on it. I greatly appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom. Prioritisation and pace, Mark, Tina.
Yeah, certainly. So as I mentioned during my input, typically it is a 3-month turnaround time that we ask for an action plan. However, I think everyone recognises the scale and the importance of this subject area. So it's perhaps unsurprising that it would take slightly longer than the 3-month period, especially when that period takes you over the festive season. So we, like I said, we have continued to engage with Police Scotland on this in terms of the progress, and we have, and we would do expect to see the action plan, I think, around about April time. As part of our management of recommendations in any event, we liaise closely with governance, audit and assurance. So the monitoring of the progress of the recommendations in the action plan is subject to a regular meeting. And as you can see from the report, that the recommendation also suggests and supports the view that the measures should be put in place to monitor progress against the areas for development, to allow public reporting and assessment of that progress to ensure complete transparency. So we will be absolutely keeping a close eye on that and linking in very much regularly with Police Scotland in this regard.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Katrina, your hand was up, went back down. Have you?
Well, I did have a comment to make, but I wondered whether, in fact, it'd be better to step back and let the associations and unions kind of come in with any comments, because it was something to do with people, the resource that is the people of Police Scotland. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thanks. Can I then follow up on the pace piece? Mark, you said there was a delay. Can you? How much longer did Police Scotland ask for?
So we expect to see the action plan in April. So it's not a massive delay, Chair. I think April of this year. So it's probably only about 4 weeks. But like I say, I mean that's just a general guide that we ask for an action plan within typically 3 months. I don't think 4 months is unreasonable in this situation, given the importance and scale of the report.
Okay, and I'll bring Kate in a moment, but of course with recommendation 11, you're clearly articulating that you're expecting the SPA and Police Scotland, to have agreed outcomes. Then it may well be that we have, and this is probably a comment to officials rather than to HMICS, this is not an exclusive Police Scotland response. Then we would need to be woven into the response so that we're going to be content about the measurables of it. Katie.
Thanks, Chair. ACC Houston is on point to kind of coordinate the response to all of the recommendations. I think, we did have a first meeting in respect to that and actually determined that the good point for us to start with is to look at already existing strategies, commitments, dashboards, etc. So everything that we have already made in terms of commitments, align those in terms of strategic themes against the recommendations, then ask ourselves the question that is what is in train still the right things. So despite what we're doing, we still have gaps in our culture that we need to address. So therefore, do we need to step down, reprioritize, step up some activities? So it's that initial piece of work that actually has taken quite a while to pull together everything that is already happening across the organisation that actually talks to this thematic review. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Katie. And simplification of a number of strategies and a number of actions, I think, can only be a good thing. The other question I had, Mark, was about the over 600 contacts about to feed into your work. Was that about usual, or was that more than you would normally receive?
So I think it's hard to offer a comparison, Chair. It's not something that we've done before. We're always slightly cautious professionally when it comes to, for example, surveys. This absolutely wasn't a survey. This was just an invitation to comment, bearing in mind, as I said, we because of the size of HMICS, we were able to do a lot of field work in terms of the 3 divisions in North, East and West command areas and specialist and corporate functions. We were conscious that there would be officers and staff within other divisions who may wish to comment, and obviously to comment anonymously should they wish. So what I would say is we were very pleased with the response. I think it's a really healthy number, and because it was a qualitative response, like I say, it was a chance for people to explain rather than just tick a box or pick a number on a scale, for example. It wasn't intended to be that. It was much more of a qualitative response to give us a real flavour of their perception of organisational culture within the police. So certainly, like I say, I don't have a direct comparator to previous inspections, for example, but what I would say is we were more than happy with the response that we got, and certainly the quality within the numbers that we got as well.
That's helpful. Thanks very much indeed. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone else want to come in. Lorna, Brian, Rob, David, anything you want to add, or Rob? But it means my comments on it.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, much appreciated, and really welcome the opportunity to comment on the report. We see it as a really measured and in-depth piece of work, albeit not exhaustive, given the complexity of the subject of policing culture. And much of our kind of cultural artefacts within the police service, they predate Police Scotland. They go back into legacy forces and beyond. Quite frankly, it's an extremely complex issue, and given that some of it has taken so long to embed within the organisation as it stands today, I think that should temper our considerations of how quickly we will turn the particular supertanker of culture. And again, one of the things we typically do in policing, which I know frustrates our partners at times, is listen to a problem which is perhaps taken generations to reach its current situation, and then ask for a 3-month action plan to fix it. So we need to, I think, approach this in a really longitudinal way, and I would encourage and hope that the SPA and the service, in responding with the action plan to this, are thinking about really sustainable longitudinal actions to bring about cultural change, and don't approach it from a sort of task force, short life working group type approach, because I think to do so risks the appearance of doing something meaningful taking precedence over actually doing something meaningful over the longer term. And I think that particularly an area for our members that's of real concern is around about the training and leadership. Now, we have obviously started to embed leadership through the Your Leadership Matters programme, but the reality is really the benefits of that programme, which continues to develop and iterate, will be felt years from now. We're talking about, Mark was really generous, spoke about sergeants and inspectors who hadn't had leadership training. The reality are some of those sergeants and inspectors are now superintendents and chief superintendents who have had very little formal leadership training outside of technical operational skills. And that looks, the impact of that varies from individual to individuals. Some of those people will have sought out leadership opportunities and professional development, and actually will be really rounded and really talented individuals. The issue being is we don't know where our gaps are as a service around about some of this stuff. So embedding a longitudinal approach to leadership training is definitely something that we would support over the kind of longer term. I think I would also reflect that I'm really pleased to hear that in doing the inspection, we were able to see the force values of integrity, fairness, and respect as being something that is well recognised. But I think that we need to move beyond recognising, those words as part of the culture of the service, and making sure that people are experiencing behaviours consistent with those values across the piece. Too often when we enter a period of crisis, whether that's an acute operational incident or some really significant organisational pressure, too often are those approaches and behaviours viewed as, well, that's something we do in peacetime, for want of a better expression, and immediately the operational challenge becomes the only show in town. And I would probably I would use the recent challenges over budget as an example of that, in terms of, it's at times of challenge that we need to cling even more steadfastly to our values, and make sure that that's how people are experiencing the service through the behaviours of colleagues and leaders, rather than them be something that's a nice to do. They must be essential at all times in terms of how we deal with one another. Probably there's one other area that I would offer a comment on, and that's probably the only area we would depart from some of the findings and recommendations, which is when we talk about the experience of probationary officers when they go to division. So in terms of moving from Tullyallen to division, Tullyallen you could probably say is it's the ultimate safe space, in terms of it's actually a really pleasant environment. Yes, it's challenging in terms of the physical activity side of things and the academic side of things, but generally speaking, it's a very pleasant environment. That's not the case when you go out on the streets. You're significantly exposed to hostility, to conflict, to assault, and a huge number of cases, actually, when you look at it for a percentage. And that often colours the experience of officers that are in that position. The reality is you don't learn to be a police officer in a classroom. You learn on the streets, So our current programme of, I think it's 92 weeks to qualify. 80 of those weeks are at division on the streets, and I think that's an important thing to remember around about that side of things, and make sure that's that investment in terms of training and development for probationers is in there as much as it possibly can be. And I do reflect on what the report has found in terms of the comment that probationers are not doing the job they joined to do. So ASP as an association, we don't think the answer to that is we train people better to do something they shouldn't be doing in the first place. We think it's a leadership challenge, and I think that the chief has started to step into that space, which is actually better defining and delineating our role in a lot of these issues around about mental health, which should be the role of an emergency service, not the role of a therapeutic subclinical type, social work type role. It needs to be clearly defined, because otherwise, as a service, our resources will continue to get pulled into spaces they shouldn't be, and we'll find ourselves, becoming less good at the things that only we can do as a service. And I think that's probably the only bit we would depart from the findings of the survey. We recognise the paradigm that the HMICS have said probationers feel like they're being asked to do a different job than the one they've been trained for. But we don't think the solution to that is to train them better to do jobs they shouldn't be doing in the first place. We think the service needs to show greater leadership around about how and what we're deployed and what our operational model is. I'll probably leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay. That's grand. Thanks, Robin. I think you're highlighting the importance of creating the conditions for the whole workforce, not just warranted officers, to flourish and to be able to do their job, and that's a real leadership issue. And whilst I respect your perspective, I think that HMICS's findings are HMICS's findings in terms of that's what they found. And I would encourage the organisation to listen, even if they think what they're being asked to listen to is something that they either don't recognise or they're uncomfortable with. I've got David then, Lorna.
Thanks, Chair. Representing staff, I also want to draw out the parts in the report that refer to staff. In particular, of interest to me is the part about the filtering of information as it goes to senior level. I think that really speaks to what Unison have raised over the last few years, both with the authority and with senior leaders in Police Scotland, and the story changes in that way to the top. So it doesn't seem quite as bad news when it gets there. I think that's very interesting that's been pulled out there. And that for me as well goes towards the staff feeling undervalued, which is the other part that's come out in the report. If what they're saying to their trade union and to their managers is not what's reaching other people at the top who have the power and the ability to do things, make decisions, to make the changes, then they are going to feel undervalued. They are going to feel that their voice hasn't been heard effectively, and I think that speaks to a lot of the frustrations that we've had in trying to deliver messages to people who maybe perhaps don't want to hear what unfortunately can be bad news quite often from trade unions. That was my observation I wanted to draw out on behalf of staff. Okay, that's helpful, David, that clarity of voice, even when it's so up and down the whole organisation, but also when the voice is saying something that is difficult and challenging to respond to. But nonetheless, I think the fact that we've got this culture report means that we're going to create conditions for embracing and welcoming that. So that's helpful. Thanks, David. Right, I'm going to give the last word to Lorna and then I will sum up.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, probably just to echo some of what Rob said. Whilst I appreciate probationers might not feel well equipped, I think a number of police officers and staff would also feel that as well, who are currently serving. It's not unique. It is a bit of a tale as old as time here. Nobody joined the service to deal with these type of pressures of mental health and other community-based things that some other services could be picking up. Also wanted to make a small point about the challenges when probationers arrive, and they might find they're not as well supported when they challenge what they deem as inappropriate. The SPF recently undertook training with Niven Rennie and Graham Goulden on active bystandership, and and how you recognise the barriers to you challenging that behaviour. And I think it was quite eye-opening for a lot of us in the room to see the benefit of that 1.5-day course. And I think that would have a huge impact on our shifts and our workforce if we allowed them to go through a similar piece, just to see when they should be challenging, when they should be supporting each other. Because I think we all sometimes get in a cycle of we're so busy just doing what we're doing every day that we can't take on what someone else is saying because they have a different view on it. So it was just those 2 points, Chair. Thanks.
That's really, really helpful. Katrina, are you wanting to come in or are you waving goodbye? Waving goodbye. Thank you very much indeed. And it's been helpful to have your input. So I think what I'm hearing is everyone is delighted with the opportunity that this report gives us to move forwards and to create a better future, building on some of the very, very positive aspects that are already there, which I think should give us confidence and encouragement to move forwards. I think we've agreed we don't want to be, whilst we recognise absolutely this is long term, we don't want to be too understanding of the things that can get in the way, whether it's budget or a resource implications of overwhelming with service delivery. And we want to create the conditions for the values to be lived, clarity of voice and supportive leadership across all levels. Noting recommendation 11 is looking for SPA and Police Scotland to put in place outcome measures. So I would be expecting, unless someone's going to tell me otherwise, we will see something at our May committee. I don't know. Is that too early? Well, as soon as reasonably possible. it will be helpful, because obviously we will see this. This is not just a Police Scotland into HMICS. We also have a responsibility in terms of the outcome measures, so we need to be part of that. So we can work that through, but certainly as soon as it's reasonably possible, without undue haste, we'll look forward to seeing that. That's grand. Thank you, Jean, very much indeed for coming. Mark, Tina, you are more than welcome to stay for the rest of our meeting, but thank you. You can see obviously with the time that everyone has given to this how important we believe this is, and the criticality. And I'm not quite sure who said it in terms of it seems to be a good time when we have, you know, operational changes, new chief, new leadership team to move forwards. So thank you both very much indeed, and thanks to Police Scotland's team who've supported all of this moving forwards.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to hand over to Katie in terms of wellbeing, but just signalling to people, I will give us a break about 12 o'clock for 10 minutes. So for planning purposes. Katie.
Thank you, Chair. I will take the paper as read. Some of the key points that I would call out is that I see this as an interim report prior to the next People Committee. And the reason why I'm calling it that is that there's obviously HMICS culture review with a number of wellbeing themes that come through that. We've got an internal audit on ill health retirement and injury on duty. We've got an HMICS frontline wellbeing report, and we've also got an independent and health and wellbeing evaluation that is being undertaken at the moment. So we want a chance to distill all of those things and then to respond at next People Committee. Probably the key things that I would call out, we'll see in 2.7.1 that we have approved Occupational Health Award of the contract to Optima Health, and in 2.8 you will see that the Employee Assistance contract has also been approved to be awarded to VivUp. So both quite substantial pieces of work, but happy to take any questions on the report. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Katie. Comments or questions? Recognising it's an interim report, we'll get fuller update at our next meeting. Dawn?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to welcome the addition, as you pointed out there, Katie, in 2.7.1 about the addition of the in-house occupational health system, and hoping that that will help us to produce any potential trends or patterns if we're catching things early, that can help us assist with risk assessment going forward, and consider any additional controls within that.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. Thanks, Dawn. Thank you. Yeah. Other comments or questions? Noting and look forward then to our next iteration of this coming. Well, next iteration of this coming forwards, but can I talk about the ill health retirement review? So we've got closure report, which is I think a process of closure, and one of the aspects that we had wanted was, I think, a bit more data within the report on ill health retirement, how long the process should take, whether we're meeting these targets or not, but also if there's anything, particularly injury and duty, is there any common themes, and is there anything that we can do in terms of prevention? I'm wondering, will that be coming to the next committee meeting, Katie?
Yes, so I think Jackie was going to come in terms of the actual report, but I think what we have seen from the trial is that from the 7 officers that took part in that trial, the average time actually was 27 days, and that compared to 61 days previously. So that process change actually has made quite a significant reduction in terms of that timeline and kind of process. The key bit for that is obviously impact on colleagues, and that's the bit that we can't lose in this. These are colleagues that are often in very kind of severe distress, anxiety, etc., around, you know, what this means for them in their future. So I think that's a positive. I think absolutely spot on in terms of the so what of what we're seeing coming through ill health retirals and injury on duty. What I can say is that every single case comes across my desk for review and a recommendation whether or not to approve. And there are some very common themes coming through in relation to those. So I do think that there is a lot of analysis that can be done in relation to that. I would say that the majority actually relate to psychological illness or injury rather than physical. So there's definitely some analysis. We've started that. We will pull that together into the next report. And I think Dr. Sarah Taylor, who's the independent individual who's undertaken the evaluation of our approach to health and well-being, will be looking more generally in the sense of what it is around prevention that we can be doing in that space.
Okay. And in terms of the wellbeing report, from last time we had expected to see a report detailing actions being taken to ensure prioritisation of workload is fair and reasonable for both officers and staff in the light of the budgetary reductions. I'm not seeing that anywhere.
No, and I apologise for that, Chair. We are going to have to bring that back. I think that I can talk with some confidence around the staff side and the steps that we've been taken, but not so with officer. It's kind of out with my remit. So we need to do some work with some of our fellow officers just in relation to that piece to pull together the report. I think if I'd submitted, or if we'd submitted something to you today, it would have been a narrative of activities that we were undertaking rather than the evidence-led impact that I know that you would be looking for.
Okay, no, that would be helpful, and it's purely for staff and warranted officers, so it would be helpful to have that in a joined up way presented to us. So that is grand. Thank you very much indeed. So moving forwards then, in terms of Jackie, the ill health retirement review.
Thank you, Chair. So this report is just to give members a final update on the joint review of ill health retirement and injury duty that has been ongoing over the kind of past number of months now. So all the improvements that were identified have now been incorporated into business as usual. So that process has become much slicker. I think Katie mentioned the trial specifically that we've kind of called out in the paper. So everybody's ideas are getting taken forward and just trying to incrementally make the process better. I think the next steps are actually the kind of probably more tricky steps, and that's why we've set up a working group under the Scottish Police Consultative Forum to look at the issues that are related to guidance, so PNB guidance and regulation. So it's not just accepting that the reason we do some of the things that we in the way we do it is because regulations say we really want to challenge, is that regulation right? Is the guidance that we're using, is that the right guidance? So we will continue to work collaboratively with our staff associations to ensure that any feedback is heard at the earliest opportunity, and if required we can take some corrective action immediately rather than us getting into the delays that for a number of reasons we did previously, so that we want to keep them under control. I'll leave it there, but happy to take any questions.
Okay, and this is maybe an operational question, and I'm happy to be advised out with the meeting, but I do also remember, and I'm not quite sure, I'm now cheating because I might be going back to Katie's report. There was a bit of discussion at one of our last people committee about full and half pay for people, both officers and staff, who were waiting on ill health retirement, and there appeared to be a discrepancy of treatment. I wonder if that has been looked at and reviewed.
So there should be a standard I mean, I think there's an example given. So there is what's called a particular case, so that there is a part in policy where half pay, full pay can be restored for individuals who would normally have moved through that limit. So I mean, I don't think we were aware of a policy discrepancy. I think it was maybe an individual case.
And how confident are we everyone's been treated properly or consistently? Is John maybe going to come in and help us?
Davey's good.
If you don't mind, Chair.
No, absolutely.
There was discussion in the sort of more of the police negotiating board of for Scotland world around about the PNB guidance related to particular, and the technical working group of the PNBS is looking at the guidance that's been in place since about 2010. So it's more around about, I would actually just mirror what Jackie said about IHR, that we're not just assuming that the regulations PMB guidance is right, and we're working through the PMBS to look at that.
Okay, but everyone else is content there's consistency of application. Okay, that's grand. Thank you very much. Anyone else want to come in and comment? Happy to accept this and close then that action. Emma, we're with you on the sexism and misogyny, and remembering there's a proposal to close, but at our last meeting we agreed that the paper that would be brought back would bring performance measures and capture all the activity in progress plus evidence of impact and measurement. It would be helpful if you could articulate what that is, because I'm not sure that it's overly clear within the paper. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and good morning, everybody. So in relation to the sex equality, tackling and misogyny work, I suppose as the chair of the delivery group, I suppose I would just, particularly on the back of the input from HMICS, just reassure you of the ongoing commitment, certainly from the senior levels of Police Scotland, to addressing the issues around sexism, misogyny, and indeed from the broader culture perspective. And I do fully accept that the paper that's before the board today probably doesn't provide the level of detail or assurance that maybe you would have hoped would have provided on this occasion. And if you'll oblige me, I suppose I'll just set out from my perspective where we're at. So as chair of the delivery group, I do have an action plan which is 22 pages, which essentially captures insights from the survey and then maps them against 4 work streams, which are the enablers of sexism and misogyny in terms of culture. What we've then done is map that against the activity and measures within Policing Together, within the Violence Against Women and Girls action plans, and then try to identify any additional issues or gaps that we may well have. It probably felt, or I'd assumed it was maybe going to be more straightforward than I had initially hoped. So from the survey findings that we've got, Chair, they have essentially told us what issues are manifesting themselves in terms of sexism and misogyny. We've then sought to work back in terms of and supporting data and evidence base to help us understand the specifics of those issues, where they are happening, what the underlying causes are, to then enable me to prioritise the activity and identify what we need to do, back to the point I think that came out in the previous conversation around culture, to make sure that the activity that Police Scotland undertakes is both effective but ultimately sustainable in the longer term. It's also become really apparent that through the ongoing delivery group meetings that we've been having, which our staff association colleagues have a seat at alongside a range of others from across the business areas, that actually there is a significant amount of the work that we would seek to monitor that actually is, for want of a better word, the day job, for example, of Katie's area of business within people and development. So we have identified that there is a lack of progress on the officer side for female officers to sergeant and then ultimately to inspector rank. We've had that information brought, and actually then the question that we're trying to answer is, well, why is that? Is that because of people still feeling that they have a choice between family and career? Is it the fact that actually people don't feel able to put themselves forward? Is it the fact that people simply don't want to apply? So some of the activity Katie is already doing within the range of work streams that she's doing, and we're then trying to apply a gendered lens to that work. So if you are, what I've asked and the report alludes to is that from a sexism and misogyny perspective, is that we try and identify those areas within the organisation where there are specific gaps or challenges that aren't already being picked up within other aspects of the business. Because for us, there is essentially all of the activity within the organisation that you could argue will have a potential gendered element or aspect to it because of the demographics within the organisation. So we're trying to apply a lens through that. What we're then doing is trying to, the conversations around first line supervisors and the importance of that work that we, and also what we've identified, particularly to Rob's point, the value and importance of our superintending ranks and indeed our police staff colleagues as first line supervisors and senior levels within the organisation, is have targeted engagement from the perspective of actually accepting and acknowledging that there is an issue around sexism and misogyny. One of the key influences in terms of actually being able to bring about sustainable behavioural change has been proven around the fact that if people haven't experienced it, well then actually they find that they have the ability to disassociate themselves with the behaviour until such times as we develop and embed that understanding. So the programme of activity that we've done by doing inputs across all of our division and departments, across their management teams, through the specific Why Male Only engagement event and awareness and insight sharing event that we held in October within the college environment, and alongside some of this bespoke and specific first line supervisor hosted conversations that we're having to understand what do people know about sexism and misogyny, what are the preconceived ideas, is helping us then tailor and inform our comms plan and our targeted interventions then from a training and planning perspective. So there's a whole load of activity happening. I'm trying my best to condense that into a user-friendly form that gives you, as the chair of the people committee and your other members as the SPA as a whole, the reassurance of the fact that the activity is doing, but also again reflecting the conversation around making the best use of the people, the time and the capacity that we have, is to ensure that we don't duplicate any of the work that's already happening. So if you're agreeable, the activity that's outlined within today's paper, I look to bring a specific report back that hopefully will have those key areas identified, specific performance measures or metrics against those that we will use. And as you said, part of it is representation across the range of ranks, the percentage of females, for example, that are in our specialisms. We've identified in flexible working, as mentioned, but actually what we've also identified is not just those that are in the process, but potentially the conversations that aren't captured that happen pre an application even being submitted that could potentially be contributing to issues around sexism and misogyny, but we've no visibility of. So it's as you would expect, because it's to do with culture, there are a lot of very deep-rooted issues, and what I'm trying to ensure as the chair of the delivery group is that we prioritise our activity and those things are going to make the biggest difference, whilst also providing the reassurance on behalf of Dep Graham as the oversight chair that other elements of work ongoing in the organisation, be it through P&D and otherwise, are doing what they can in terms of their structures and processes to address the issue. And a very basic but practical example in Katie's world, for example, is ensuring that we have mixed gender panels, for example, on our selection processes as a bare minimum requirement. Again, and the impact of that could be relatively hard to measure, but we would hope there would be fewer appeals or fewer suggestions of actually people not being treated fairly through promotion processes or reviews. So it's how I can evidence for use and provide you that reassurance of impact. And to be really frank, for some of this, the impact is not going to be for a period of time longer, but it's looking forward enough to give you that idea that we are starting to monitor and measure the trends towards it. So I'm more than happy to speak with yourself or other members of the group if needs be off table to provide you some of that ongoing insight in terms of the specifics of what we're working on. And as I say, I'll bring back a more detailed and specific report to future meetings, which hopefully will better manage then those performance measures, the key activity that our delivery group will focus on, and reassure you then that lens that we're applying to the other elements of business already ongoing within the organisation.
So
Sorry, I was on mute. Members, thank you, Emma. Any questions from members or comments? Tom?
Thanks, Emma. That's really, there's a lot of work going on there. So there's a couple of wee points. In papers we've seen that's still describing that work is in discovery phase. Are you still suggesting that it's discovery phase, or are we moving beyond that? And if I could add one other bit, is you very well described the disproportionality in terms of how officers are able to access flexible working, and within policing together that's a focus. So particularly in those operational roles rather than the roles where it's perhaps more simple to give flexible working. What progress are we making there? And we've described it at pace. So there's a demonstration of intent to the workforce as well. When might we see the positive promotion of flexible working and operational roles being published to the workforce?
Okay, so just a couple of things. I suppose the discovery phase very much sort of refers to my role, I suppose, from the chair of the group in terms of being able to consolidate it into something, to be really frank, that I can hold the work stream leads to account for and then be able to report back against. There is a massive amount of work happening in the organisation that actually we could directly align and show you activity that's happening, as I say, as part of day-to-day business. So there, the bit is around how we prioritise and task. So just to provide you that reassurance. And I would also just add, I know that the work that we are doing in terms of publicising the work through the internet is having an impact. I can hear the conversations, I can hear people talking about it, and I've been directly approached and people have come forward and asked to report things as a consequence of actually seeing the organisational commitment to wanting to do something about it. And I suppose a key bit for me is making sure that people feel able to reach out at other levels of the organisation to report, as opposed to necessarily see me as it's great that they see an individual figurehead, but actually it needs to be beyond that organisation, but appreciating that we need to absolutely start somewhere. Flexible working, just to reassure you, is an ongoing conversation that we have. We're very live to it. It does feature in terms of the sexism and misogyny work. Very mindful, of the fact that there is absolutely that balance to be struck in terms of those seeking to work flexibly versus the organisational need versus actually then the potential impact on individuals within the areas of business who aren't availing of flexible working, and in terms of broader welfare considerations, ability to avail of annual leave, requirement to work for overtime, potentially if it means that there is a shortfall or a gap. So flexible working, there is an ongoing organisational commitment around and certainly in terms of the review of our service operating model and how we prioritise and deliver elements of our business, something that we will ensure that is factored in. So I think Katie probably wants to come in on that point, but there is and remains an organisational commitment to it, as I say, just within our financial envelope, and actually our current resource and profile is just that striking of the balance between individual business and wider organisational needs too.
Okay, Katie, then I'll check with other members, and if no other members want anything, I'll bring you in, Rob. Katie.
Thank you, Chair. So we know from the data that 13.5% of the workforce made a flexible application in the last year, and we have about 9.3% of officers and staff are working part-time hours at the moment, and that would be in line with ONS statistics, actually spot on, would sit at 9.3%. In addition to that, we know that we have 4.4% of officers work compressed patterns and 9.1% of staff as well. So we're sitting as an organisation just under 23% of our workforce working part-time or compressed hours. We know, as Emma was saying, there is more that we need to do. And actually the question for me is not so much about those numbers, but what conversations or applications don't happen, and what are the reasons for that. And then in addition to that, looking at whether or not flexible working then has an impact on for those who want to progress through ranks. We all see progression in different ways. It could be lateral, etc. So I think it's the nuances of the data that we need to look at. I do think, not unique to Police Scotland, I've seen it in other organisations, the difficulty here is not ending up with what feels like a two-tier workforce, where you have some roles that it's just harder to accommodate. You still can, but it's harder, particularly when you look at an application in the context of a team and what applications or what working patterns there already are. And then obviously in corporate services, it's easier to accommodate some of those flexible working patterns. So the difficulty for us is going back to HMICS. One of the recommendations around parity between officers and staff is that perception and reality around what some of the flexible working looks like across the roles and how we describe that as an organisation to our staff and officers.
Okay, that's helpful. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Katie. I mean, that analysis of data is really helpful, and as you're aware, those broad numbers I'm aware of. Is there an ability to look deeper in that data in terms of role profiles and locations and things like that to see if is there disproportionality in that, or is that too complex at this stage?
And before you come back, Katie, I'd be interested to know the definition of part-time hours. So, you know, is part-time 35 rather than 25 or 20?
So part-time will be anything below the standard contracted hours that we would have within the organisation. I do think that there are some nuances to the data that we can get to. I think on officers, in some ways, that's easier because we can kind of look across ranks and then within particular teams. With staff, that's a little bit more difficult because, as we know, we have one different job description for every 7 members of staff in the organisation. So therefore, actually looking by role is quite difficult. But what we could do is to try and look at, again, kind of almost a heat map. What we are hearing from within the organisation, though, is a sense that any flexible working agreements that are put in place are not being reviewed regularly. So actually, you know, where staff are perhaps moving teams or moving roles, they're taking those arrangements with them automatically, if I can use that word. And in some cases, that's right. But in other cases, as an organisation, to Emma's point around operational requirements, we have to look at that flexible working pattern within the context of a team and what the requirements are. So I know that we have a piece of work that needs to be done in relation to that as well. So yes, we can do more on the data. We will do more on the data. I think it's that bit up front, though. What conversations or applications aren't happening for cultural reasons? And then if you are working flexibly, does that inhibit your progression through the organisation for those who want to progress?
Okay, thanks, Katie. Okay, I'm going to ask Rob then if you want to come in with a brief comment.
Chair, thanks very much. It was really just to commend the approach taken by ACC Bond in terms of the set and work. You know, she mentioned there around about the conversations that have started and the feeling that it's kind of moved beyond the ownership of a single senior figurehead sort of thing. And I think that's a really important thing when we're talking about securing cultural change. It's almost a bit of a kind of grassroots movement, and that's something that we're not always comfortable with as a service, because it feels that we're perhaps ceding control and consistency. But actually, what we're seeing is people at all ranks understanding the vision of actually trying to make us a much more equal and equitable service and tackle some of these institutional issues, which I think over the longer term will be much more likely to secure the necessary change and cultural change within the organisation.
Okay, that's grand. Thanks, Rob. So the conundrum I have, and I think you've been explicit about it, Emma, and it's implied within a lot of work, is how do we bring everything together? So and be able to, because in a way the People Committee is indifferent to all of the streams of work. We need to know about outcomes. We need to check that things are are moving forwards across warranted officers and staff, and in particular, I think, Tom, for the Policing Together oversight group. And we know that people talk about the clunkiness of 2 or 3 different approaches when actually one would do. So it's maybe for officials to think through the reporting arrangements and how we do that in a comprehensive way. Katie, have you an answer for us?
In part. So and maybe it touches upon one of the agenda items that we have, which is around implementation plans, 3.1 for people strategy and SWP and dashboards. So perhaps we can pick it up when we get to that, about how we're trying to pull it together through that.
Well, I think if I'm seeing no one else wanted to come in, Emma, thank you for that. I think look forward to seeing a more focused outcome measures at our next committee meeting, and we'll move on then to the people strategy and SWP, Katie.
Thank you, Chair. So we put this as a verbal update. So we are working to the next people committee 30th of May, and for that 2 quite significant pieces of work. One is around the implementation plans for both the strategic workforce plan and also people strategy that were approved at the end of last year. And then the other one is the development of the dashboards. So previously we talked about kind of strategic workforce dashboards being around kind of leadership, learning, well-being, etc. And actually, from the work that we've done in engaging with stakeholders, actually what we're going to do is probably go horizontal with the dashboards, so that the dashboards talk to each of the outcomes in the people strategy and strategic workforce plan. The idea being behind that then is to somehow try and pull together all of the pieces of work that are happening across the way. So if we look at some of the outcomes that relate to equality, that enables us on the dashboard and in the implementation plans to pull together the work within tackling sexism, misogyny, wider policing together work, HMICS audit reports, BDO audit reports, and kind of the workforce dashboard data. So we are working towards May. There's a lot of work happening in the background. We are trying to automate the data as we go through this as much as possible as well. So I think we should have a good product for May, for a good discussion that enables People Committee to scrutinise our plans around both implementation but also the evidence-based reporting that you are asking for.
That's helpful. Thanks very much for that. Look forward to seeing what's coming to our next committee meeting. Colleagues, content with that? Okay, so if we stay with you, Katie, in terms of the workforce report.
Thank you. So again, I'll take this as read. A couple of key points of insight that I would like to pull out is through the work that the recruitment team have been undertaking in terms of analysis. We're really starting to focus much more on candidate journey. So recognising the employment market in which we are operating at the moment, and some of the further challenges we have around attraction, particularly for police officer roles. So this report calls out that 11.5% of officer applications are actually successful. So that starts to tell us then as an organisation what the pipeline is, the pool of potential candidates, the size of that we need to be able to approach, to attract, and then to move through the recruitment process in order to get to the number of successful candidates that we are needed for each intake. In addition to which, we now have very good data that tells us that the average time it takes to recruit an officer from application through to joining is 241 days. We know against market data that candidate expectations, particularly different generations, that is not hitting the mark. So we need to look at end-to-end process in relation to that. We also know that for staff, we have 5.7% success rate. So it's very low, I would say, compared to other benchmarks. But we will also say that it's taking 146 days on average to recruit a member of staff. Again, we know when you look at some industry averages and some of the organisations that we might be competing against, broader than public sector, 146 days is too long. Some candidates are getting an outcome within 30 days. We are losing candidates is what I'm saying. So we've got a big push here on what is it that we can do around the candidate journey and the back end processes and what that looks like. The only other points I would call out, 2.2.3, we have an independent general practitioner who is undertaking a review of the medical standards at the moment. So we will report that back once that's concluded. And the only other points I would call out are in relation to absence. So we can see at 2.5 in terms of officer absence, that sits at 6.53%. And that's circa about £55 million of lost productivity. And for staff, the absence is 7.8%. And again, that's circa about £22 million. So this is really the first time that we are getting much smarter at putting a pound sign, I guess, against some of the cost, both for individuals who are impacted by absence, but also for the organisation. So when we start to talk about officer numbers, and kind of whatever the number might be and potential turnover, we are also now starting to deep dive into what extraction rates look like. So when you're looking at absence and average absence, when you're looking at modified officers, etc., so that you can actually start to look at availability of the workforce. And that's really what the direction of travel, for example, that we would move to in the dashboards. So I'm happy to take any questions in relation to that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Paul?
Yeah, sorry, the couple of stats you came up with about a length of time to hire people, is that from start of the process until they start or until they've had an offer and accepted it?
No, it's start and actually the majority of that is vetting. And we know that, we have to get that right. We've made a very clear commitment as an organisation, but nonetheless, we're in a really competitive recruitment market at the moment. So there is this piece for us as an organisation where perhaps we've slipped back a little bit about putting candidates at the centre of what we're doing and almost becoming, just so focused on what that experience is. And therefore the referrals, that kind of, one good service and how many people talk about, rather than I really wouldn't bother applying, you're not going to hear for months and months and months. So it's a stark stat that does pose very significant challenges for us as an organisation.
Yeah, no, I can absolutely understand that from my career in the past, that you apply for something, it goes into the dark ether and you have no clue, you can't plan anything, and you're certainly not holding out your hopes, so you go off and find something else. So yeah, no, that's really helpful, thank you.
Any other asks from colleagues? I've got a couple of things then, Katie. You've talked about the percentage of absence. Do we have a figure in mind of what we think? Because clearly people are going to be unwell, they're not going to be at their work. Work's good for people's health, so we want to have people at work as best they can. Setting aside the financial implications, it's good for everyone to have more people at their work than less. Is there a sense of what one would reasonably expect from this type of work? So are the percentages we've got the best we can do, or can we improve things?
I'd always like to say we can improve things. This is an interesting one, actually, not just for us as an organisation, but other organisations I've worked in the debate around, what a target might look like. And I think that for Police Scotland, I would not want to see a one figure across the board, because I think that there is so much diversity of role. I mean, we've been doing a lot more benchmarking against ONS data. And, what we know, for example, is over the last 5 years, there's been an average 5% increase year on year in mental health related absences. So actually, I think as we work forward, I would like us to have an aspirational number, because I think that's good for us, and therefore we can tell as we start to evaluate the wellbeing strategy whether or not that's having any impact whatsoever. But I do think that we need to lay that against the backdrop of external data and what we can see is happening. I've used somewhere between 4 and 5% in the past, but what I would say is that I do think it's a very different pattern post-COVID of absence within workforces.
Okay, that's grand, thank you. And on that theme, given sickness absence can often be an indicator of problems with culture, how easy would it be? Because I think it would be helpful for us to see the range. So if sickness absence is 6.7, are some departments 30 and others none? So it would be helpful in due course, but it may well be that that is an SWP people strategy reporting conversation that we have at our next meeting.
I would agree, and the ask that you've been making of us is, yes, looking at that in terms of sickness absence, but also the nuances then we see around attrition rates, around potential grievances, etc., so that we can start to see what that looks like within particular areas. And then overlaying, our data team under Tina and others have been doing an amazing piece of work where they can look almost kind of real time, for example, against assaults against officers or officers that have been to traumatic events, so that actually we can then start to think about, well, how does that then interlace with the data that then we're seeing within the workforce?
Yeah, and what support can we put in to heal people so that they're not adversely affected in the longer term by working conditions.
Absolutely.
Brand, thank you. Noted. So we're still with you then in terms of policy update.
Thank you. So this policy assurance report. So this was a paper that we previously brought to People Committee that actually really wanted to give committee members some visibility and assurance around our policy schedule for the year. So I'm talking employment policy when I talk about policy. There are a number of, I'm going to say, competing demands around reviewing and developing policy. So this really is across the organisation trying to pull that work into one place so that us, the Federation, our trade unions are clear on what the proposed policy work is for the year, and then how we have a framework whereby we can reprioritise policies as we need to for their review. So, for example, we know that there's been piece of work in relation to changes in legislation around flexible working. We know that there's significant other pieces coming on board that we might need to reprioritise a review. We also know within Policing Together, there's an ask for us to review a number of policies. We need to get to them, but I want a really clear plan here so that we are able to manage our workload and your expectations around that. So Appendix A lays out the proposed, as it stands at the moment, policy schedule for this year. Albeit we keep this under review at JNCC for both officers and staff.
Okay, any comments or questions? Tom?
Sure, thanks, Katie. And I know we've had the conversation around this in terms of Policing Together. There's a fundamental requirement to ensure that we don't have discriminatory policies. And while we have to prioritise for workforce workload, I'm sure people will agree that that would be the highest priority. And given our determination to drive out institutional discrimination, particularly in policies, I still see that as a high priority. Just to invite comment on
that. I'd absolutely agree that there's no doubt about that. I think what I would say is that I stand assured that all of our policies are legally compliant. What I would say, though, is that there's a number of them around tone of voice, accessibility, and again, thinking about when we develop policies, they're developed from a colleague perspective. They always, we always need to have the legal piece, but actually, for me, it's about how we write policy so that we're not landing a 27-page policy on a colleague who just needs to understand, what is it that you need from me as an organisation. I do think that there are a number of other pieces as well that are coming on. So we've been asked to look at hybrid working. We've got drugs and alcohol testing, which we also need to prioritise, as well as I say, kind of a number of other legislative changes. if there's work coming through, for example, from Policing Together, which actually is showing through, you know, we've obviously got equalities impact assessments, but if there's something missing in a policy, there is the ability to be able to bring a policy review onto this schedule of work and reprioritize it. I think what I'm saying is that something else then kind of gets pushed down the priority list. So definitely it's there for discussion, and that in part was why we wanted this framework, was that so everybody had that oversight and the ability to be able to input into the prioritization of policies.
Okay, thank you. And can I just check the uniform and appearance? Was that an equality piece? Yeah, okay. Grand, thank you very much indeed. So we'll move on then to Vicky in terms of Forensic Services People Update.
Great, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to attend the People Committee today on behalf of Forensic Services. Members will be aware that following the changes to the Forensic Services governance arrangements approved at the authority in August last year, that it was agreed that assurance on people-related matters would move from the Forensic Services Committee to the People Committee. So as such, the paper I've submitted today is really just an overview document to really set the scene in terms of people-related matters and internal governance within Forensic Services. So I'll take the paper as read, but I'll just call out a few key points, if that's okay with yourself, Chair. Yep. So on page 2, 1.1 really sets out the Forensic Services strategy and significantly the strategic outcome aligned to people, where our people are supported through a positive working environment, enabling them to provide excellent forensic services. And that's obviously, there's a set of strategic objectives which align with that outcome. So our main internal governance meeting, providing that oversight on people-related matters, is through our People Board. So this is quite a well-established meeting. It's supported well by Police Scotland, P&D, Equality and Diversity HR Advisor, SPA Finance, SPA Risk and Assurance, and it is also attended by our trade union colleagues. So it really just provides that visibility on recruitment, organisational change, finance, and really progresses looking at the progress of our people plan. The people plan for 24-25 is currently being developed in line with our wider Forensic Services business planning processes, and aims to really support a more mainstreaming approach to ED&I and wellbeing. We also look at people metrics and discuss these aligned with our Forensic Services performance framework, and also have embedded that risk management approach, looking at people-related risks in that meeting as well. So we've got real visibility of our people-related matters across the organisation. In terms of health and safety, again, a well-established governance structure is in place, again supported by our Police Scotland Health and Safety colleagues, and also attended by our TU colleagues as well. This reports into the Health and Safety, Police Scotland Health and Safety Board as well. A final point I just want to bring out as well in terms of the report is that our new operating model, as members will be aware, within Forensic Services, was really developed with that people element in mind, and strongly through the whole model itself. We're currently in the implementation phase, and it's really around designing, it has been designed to focus on the improved overall environment for everyone within our workplace, with greater management support and empowering our people, and also career progression. So I'll pause there just to see if there's any question from members.
Okay, thanks, Vicky. Questions or comments from members? Paul?
Yeah, I've got a few small questions. Just, and apologies if you don't have this stat to hand. In one of the previous items, Katie was talking about how long it takes to recruit a member of staff and a police officer. Do you know how long it takes on average to recruit a member of the forensics team?
Yes, thanks, Paul. Yes, we're currently looking at this in detail to really look at that overall process, but it's roughly between about 4 to 6 months. Some of our challenges are around vetting, for example, but also in terms of the career progression opportunities that some of our recent recruitment has opened up for staff. There's often a resultant backfill or recruitment opportunity and vacancy elsewhere in the organisation. So that is one of the challenges for us at the moment.
So at the previous Forensics Committee, you mentioned that it took that 60% of vacancies were filled in-house, which is good up to a point. But what that does do is it creates a backfill problem, and it therefore, you know, one of the issues we've got is not getting enough staff to carry out the work, and that leads to diminution in performance. So if 60% of cases of vacancies are filled in-house, you're backing up the amount of time it takes to get that problem resolved. So what is the People Board doing about that?
Yes, thanks, Paul. As you say, it is a real positive in terms of that career progression within the organisation, particularly when we've got a number of opportunities at entry-level scientific roles within the organisation. So it's really good to see our staff moving on across both lateral and promoted posts across the organisation. So what the People Board look at along with our recruitment meeting as well is what the impact of any vacancies are, and what we're trying to do is look at how opportunities to think ahead and look at mechanisms whereby we can potentially look at the resultant backfill opportunities and having quicker decisions around that. We obviously use our recruitment policy and procedures within Police Scotland SPA, and again, there's opportunities around there such as anybody who may be on reserve lists, so we can go back to candidates. But as has already been discussed, that can be challenges, can be challenging across the workforce, and people who might have applied previously, they have not been successful. We can look at backfill opportunities, but there's a significant delay there. So
an internal promotion, presumably you fill it out, the vetting process, because you don't need it. It's internal. They're already working for us.
For some roles.
Ah, right. Okay. That
So
throws
there's
up
different levels of vetting requirement depending on roles.
Yeah. But say someone is being, you know, entry-level scientist being promoted up to another level, presumably, you know, there's staging posts for this. I mean, the People Committee, is that like a star chamber, or the People Board, is that like a star chamber that is stopping, adding as a break to recruitment to try and match it with resources? Or?
No, I wouldn't say so. We look at recruitment decisions on a fortnightly basis. So it's very much more as and when people either move on to other roles, resign, retire from the organisation, then it's quicker decision making around that, around where the need is for specific roles across our organisation. Okay, and what linkage is there with Katie and her team in terms of, I mean, they're obviously trying their best to try and streamline this process. Is there any learning we can get from that for forensics, seeing as we're all part of one big organisation? Yes, we have a dedicated recruitment team which is aligned to our forensic services recruitment needs. Good communication there again. If there are any specific issues and specific, I would say, bottlenecks across that whole system from the initial point that a vacancy arises all the way through to recruitment, that's the detail we're working on just now in terms of where there are potential opportunities for improvement. Great, thanks. I've just got two more things, Chair. One is 2.8, the police-led Your Leadership Matters and forensics participation in that. Just to say, I think that's great that you're involved in that. And then 2.11, there's a reference to a key capability team manager role. Is that a standalone role, or is that something that's been added on to someone else's responsibilities? So that's a standalone role, which through our operating model development, we identified that there was a need for that first line manager role across the organisation. So it is a standalone role, and we have a number of them, around 30 across the organisation, to really focus on that people related support. Great, no, thanks. That's me, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. So if there's no other questions or comments from colleagues. Vicky, in terms of reporting arrangements and what we would expect to see, it would be helpful to have, so that's been very helpful. Thank you for that introduction and that oversight. I think it would be helpful perhaps at the next meeting to have a report of what our typical outcome measures would be that we can measure and progress, so that we can actually have evidence for our assurance. If you could work with the governance officials for that, that would be really helpful.
Yes, of course. Thanks.
Thank you. Dawn, so that you can have a complete run at your papers, I'm going to ask us to break and come back at 12:05. Thank you. reports.
Thank you very much, Chair. Starting with the Health and Safety Quarterly Report, I'd just like to point out a few things. I'll take it as read, but and I also want to emphasise that there is still an appetite for me to enhance this report as we go forward. The first thing I really wanted to come back to was the action in regards to Surefire, the action point 005. I agree that this should remain ongoing. It does say proposed to close, but I agree it still has a bit of work to do in that area. A meeting was recently held with myself, a few of my team members, Service Delivery and Digital Division. Certainly enhancements have been made since the quarter two report. And that Digital Division are confident that all areas will be engaged in the next few weeks. In addition to that, they also now have access to an events calendar, and so they're deploying the earpieces in advance of those. And there are plans also to produce a communication from Health and Safety when Digital have engaged with everyone in the next few weeks to give full details again of the process for gaining access to that equipment and what requirements are needed. And then after which time, once we've got full deployment, it'll then be passed to stores where this will now become part of standard operating kit. So I would want to bring that back, if that was okay with yourself, Chair, in the next May, so that I could give you a fuller update as to where we are with that. Another couple of items I'd want to bring to your attention. Lithium-ion batteries, I should say as well, sorry, Surefire is now part of the Organisational Risk Register, as is lithium-ion batteries. We've added this to the risk register as well, as I'm going to be chairing a short life working group to bring together all the work that's taken place within the wider force. So we will have representation on that group from roads policing, digital, productions, etc., to look at all the work that's going on within the wider force to bring together and produce some form of national guidance around that. We understand the risk of in relation to fire is quite low still. However, we want to be on the front foot in terms of providing reassurance and guidance that we are working together to bring that all into one sort of national guidance for all. Some of the other issues in terms of the statistics. So we've issued some statistics there in relation to assault. You probably see on the slide, the first slide, which is number 7, that looks at the accident reporting. The during arrest and custody is quite significant. 55% of that is actually when we've done a deeper dive within custody itself. So we're engaging with the Criminal Justice Services Division on this. So we're working together with them to get a clearer picture of why that is and where we need to work with that. Again, we always caveat that with the hope that people are just reporting more when there are incidents, and we're certainly seeing that in the near miss area, that reporting has improved there. I think that was all I really wanted to bring out and highlight, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Dawn, that's helpful. Members have any questions or comments? No. I've just got a couple then. And apologies, I should know this, in terms of the way that you work, so the RPE working group, will that have staff side and trade union representative on that as a matter of course? Yeah, okay, that's grand. The other aspect was on your stats. I'm not sure, and again, it may well be that we have it reported in a different way, perhaps on an annual basis. Are these statistics quite good, or are they getting worse? So you're giving us a commentary. So I would find it helpful to see comparisons. So whether it's an SPC or a way of presenting this to show either evidence of improvement or getting worse, and what actions taken. And then the information about problems with arrest and custody. Where do we look at the the injury to people who are in custody. So this is the workforce, rightly so. Where does the injury to people who are in custody get reported to?
That still comes to us, just in a different format. So it comes to us as a third-party incident, and anything that in relation to that needs investigation comes from a joint investigation with ourselves and custody.
And the assurance, does that go up through people and performance? Right.
It goes to the Health and Safety Board, yeah.
Okay. People content with that. So thank you for the work that you're doing and looking at how you report things and making sure that we move forwards, and thank you for the work that you're doing on SureFire. So if we're staying with you then for the certificate of assurance process.
Thank you. Yes, so we launched a pilot as a proof of concept very early into the new year. I went to the divisional commanders meeting at the end of last year to inform them of the pilot and what that entailed. Even at that stage, I was given some assurance that they were really happy with the changes that we were wanting to implement around assurance and making it sort of a more thematic approach. So we carried out a short pilot with A Division and OSD, and it emphasised that it was not done in real time. So we were trying to ensure that we got some kind of outcome for the Health and Safety Board. And we also wanted to make sure that we were able to give you some assurance as well of how that worked. So we've still got a bit of work to do around about a work plan and how we're going to execute this going forward into the next financial year. But the information that we've gleaned and the feedback so far has been that this is a much improved method of giving ARSIT, Police Scotland and the SPA assurance that we are being compliant and we are reaching significant goals, and also subsequently looking to see where improvements and actions need to be taken. And we're utilising the tools, the digital tools that Police Scotland already have access to, which in terms of feedback so far have been welcomed by the people who took part in that. Some of the feedback essentially was that it has made it easier. It's made it easier for people to comply in terms of what the ask is. And it's given a way of us seeing that evidence, certainly from our health and safety advisors' perspective as well, that they're really happy that they could see that evidence as well that's been provided. We do need to come back to this committee, and we will come back with any findings that we have in terms of actions and improvements going forward. But I hope that you can see that this is an approach that you might welcome in terms of us looking at a theme, and we've picked risk assessment going forward being that theme, that we are actually complying. So I'll take any questions if you have any.
Okay, thanks for that, Dawn. Comments or questions from members or other colleagues? I suppose the question that I have is, you don't know what you don't know. And clearly in the private section, we've got work on estates coming to us. And I'm thoughtful then about how confident are we when we're asking senior leaders and managers to talk about the health and safety issues within their area, that they're actually rehearsing everything that they need to know and be aware of.
Yeah, I think that's for me really part and parcel of this. And I think from our perspective, what we're going to do looking forward is really create a sort of work plan, a sort of forecast of things that we think, based on the evidence we're gathering through scope and that accident incident near miss data, and looking at where we then take our approach going forward. I think what was happening in the past was there was there was a very long questionnaire that went out to divisional commanders about what they had in place, which I don't think gave us that level of assurance that we need. So I'm hoping that by making sure that we're looking at the themes around where we're seeing need to check that improvements are made and that compliance is being made, that will give us more assurance, and it will also help the health and safety team to identify any gaps that we might have in our approach, to assist and support where we can with the wider force and staff. Of course, there'll be a corporate services side to this as well. So it'll be across the entire force that we will be getting representation on from this.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Dawn. People content with that? Good. So look forward to seeing how this then develops. Thank you very much for all your work on that. And then finally, your 3-year strategic plan.
Yes, thanks, Chair. So just to say that this has been to the Health and Safety Board, as had the Certificate of Assurance actually, and were endorsed. So this new action plan sets out to prioritise the health and safety for the next few years, looking to take the best work of the previous iteration and how we can adapt that and enhance, and really looking to digitise and simplify procedures to assist everyone in making sure that they can comply with health and safety. I've kept it quite high level and not too prescriptive, really on purpose. It's deliberate to ensure that, you know, health and safety practices change very rapidly, like every other part of the organisation does. So we need as a team to make sure that we're keeping abreast of that change, to understand any initiatives or innovations that we as an organisation can benefit from. It is there as well to ensure existing risks are effectively controlled and managed, but also where we can identify any emerging risks and make sure that they are added to our organisational risk register, and the appetite is there for everyone to collaborate to ensure that we mitigate the risks where reasonably practicable. I think the key for me for this strategy is also to empower officers and staff to make the informed decisions about their own health and safety. I think that we've definitely identified within the health and safety team where there are gaps within policies and perhaps standard operating procedures. And I think that's key to making sure that we create a really pertinent training plan as well, and that we communicate all of this effectively by having a productive intranet. So I welcomed what Katie was saying earlier in regards to having a sort of direction of policy, and I think that that's something I will take forward with my team as well, to prioritise where those needs are. We've got a dashboard at the moment that we're working towards, but I think it would be worthwhile bringing it to yourselves to share that. And yeah, I believe there's a huge correlation as well. You'll see that there's a well-being part of the strategic action plan going forward. I think if we don't get that right, it's really difficult to engage people with health and safety. And so we want to build on that culture so that they feel considered, and that health and safety is not just part of another thing they have to do, but it's part of how we behave. And so that's really what we're working towards with this strategy. Work that the health and safety policy, there's a small team within my team who are working on policy, and a small team within my team who are working on training development. And I think coupled with that and the collaboration that we've already got going on with wellbeing leads, hopefully that will help to meet some of the recommendations that were also highlighted in the HMICS report. An action plan from the strategic plan will come to this committee again, just to keep you abreast of where we are and what progression we've made. So happy to take any questions.
Comments or questions from my board member colleagues? No. Should I be worried about the red and ambers that are in the 21-24 reporting?
I think some of those have probably just been, I've had a look through all of the risk, and no, I think that they were there. I think it's just different approaches to the strategic plan. I think what the reds really indicate is that there is maybe some work still to be done, and we're aware of that. And what we've done is we've continued to address this in the new strategic action plan. So any of the areas that are identified as red have been carried forward to make more continuous improvement on that.
And when you're reporting to us, will you think about time-bound objectives so that we get a sense of when things should be implemented by and how it will be?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, if I've got no further comments or questions, I'm going to thank you, Dawn, very much indeed.
Thank you
for that very important piece of work. We have postponed the Inspectorate of Education, the Modern Apprenticeship review, and we'll look forward to having that at our next meeting. So we're back with you, Katie, in terms of the biannual leadership and talent report.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I'll take the report as read. A couple of pieces that I would call out is My Career. So that's 12 months since Police Scotland launched My Career. There was a piece of analysis undertaken at the end of that 12 months with some recommendations taken forward in respect of continuous improvement. So we're moving forward with those. Your Leadership Matters. We have the steering group that remains in place at the moment. 2.2.4 talks to completion rates and 2.2.5 to overall evaluation. We recognise the comments particularly from the Scottish Police Federation, who we're working with in respect of one of the modules, so particularly module 3 and how that's landing. So when we look at the overall evaluation, we can see that the evaluation for that module is significantly lower than modules 1 and 2. So we've undertaken a piece of work to review that. In addition to which, the Federation did ask us to look at whether or not we could move from online digital delivery to in-person. Again, some work was undertaken with that, and that would not be possible to do. It's both time prohibitive, but also cost prohibitive, and the abstraction rates, particularly for officers, would just not make that possible. But what we have done is we've looked at consolidation events at the end and trying to put those into much more local in-person. So we've tried to accommodate some of their request. I would then just call out the People Manager Development Programme. So there was a pilot that was undertaken on that. If Your Leadership Matters is around the values and behaviours of leaders, the People Manager Development Programme is much more around how to deal with absence, how do you support well-being, what's the policy in relation to grievances, etc. So we've had 177 colleagues have participated in that so far. That's getting very good evaluation. And actually overall now we start to move that number up, to around over 300 that have now completed that. The other key piece I'd call out is in relation to mediation. So as we move forward with an organisation for understanding much more around the insight, particularly around grievances and how we can get to a preventative place of workforce resolution, we have 20 trained mediators internally now in the organisation, with a further 12 being trained in the next coming months. So far, they've intervened in 12 particular situations. This is a cultural change for us as an organisation, rather than moving to a place of policy and grievance. But how do we become more accepting and welcoming of mediation as an intervention for us? What we'll look to do is to launch that mediator network much more so when we go live with the new grievance policy. So we're almost there. We're in agreement with the unions. There's a couple of points we need to get over the line in our agreement, but then we will launch a new grievance policy. And with that, we will have the wraparound support of the mediators. So I'm happy to take any questions in relation to the paper. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. Very comprehensive reporting and responsiveness to issues that are raised, and the evaluation obviously is going to be key and critical to it. Members, any comments or questions? No. Colleagues, any comments or questions? Okay, so we're noting that, but I think I'm particularly, bring in Rob, I'm particularly keen to see the evaluation, so where people are thoughtful about how it works, but clearly you're saying if something's not evaluating well, then you'll respond and change and move that forwards. Rob, you've got a comment?
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, just welcome the iterative approach that the service has taken to these leadership products. your Leadership Matters work, etc. I think that's something that's to be commended. We recognise, that we're on a journey in terms of these products, and I guess to the only point I would offer a different perspective on is around about in-person training. So the in-person leadership products used to certainly be a feature at almost every promoted rank in the service. So it's not so much that we can't and haven't done these things before, it's we're making a conscious choice not to do them, because there are cost implications. But again, these things were built in to how we went about our business, even to an extent pre-pandemic. And I get through custom and practice, we've all become so accustomed to doing our business the way that the meeting is progressing this morning online. It doesn't always mean that that's the optimum solution to these things as well. So we would continue to encourage the service to look at that more blended model where appropriate, using in-person training. And I know that those discussions are taking place.
Okay, that's helpful. Thanks, Rob. Lorna?
Yeah, obviously just to raise that as well, and to say perhaps if we're going to have them online, we could consider reducing the numbers, because I think what was prohibitive to the experience of officers on the course was the number of delegates that were logged in, and sometimes that naturally means people switch off because there's so many they're not going to miss me, comes the sort of reaction.
Okay, thanks. Katie, I wonder if it would be helpful for us to see a report on some of that. So particularly looking at impact assessment from an EDI point of view, in terms of how is that taken into account, and then the other mechanisms of which I hadn't thought of before, but if Lorna's saying, what's the maximum number? So I think it would be helpful in slower order if we could get a position paper commenting on that, so the steps that have been taken to mitigate against some of the anxieties, and because at the end of the day we need the best possible leadership cohort as we can, and it would be helpful, I think, to take that forwards.
We can definitely do that. So obviously there was an evaluation done around the feasibility of online. So we're just talking Your Leadership Matters. Is the particular offering that the Federation rightly have been pushing us, and so they should to be saying, is there something different you could be doing in this space? So we can certainly bring that to the People Committee. In addition to that, we do have a full evaluation pack that is assessed and reviewed at our Your Leadership Matters steering group. So there's no reason why that can't come forward. As I say, that goes to every steering group, so we can bring that forward as well. I think more broadly, I think perhaps part of the difference with Your Leadership Matters is the numbers. So a number of the leadership offerings that you'll see within the report are smaller numbers of officers and staff. That, here we're talking about kind of 5,500. And there's something as an organisation that if we rolled that out and we made it smaller numbers, although we will look at that, we will be well past autumn of this year. We will be well into 2025. So you'll be at a point where we've been 2 years, 2.5 years potentially at rolling out a leadership programme. So we need to get it right. But also for me, there is a piece about us kind of bringing Your Leadership Matters, the 3 modules, to conclusion, and then thinking what else as an organisation, because you don't just stop there just because people have been on 3 modules and a consolidation session. It's then what happens around 360 feedback, a leadership objective, short life working groups, how we bring networks of leaders together, etc. So that's almost the next phase of work that we need to get into as well. But we can bring papers back, Chair. Yeah.
Okay. That's grand. Thanks very much indeed for that. I think we're still with you in terms of the recruitment and vetting.
Yes, thank you. So this was a report that committee had asked for on recruitment and protected characteristic impact. What I will say in relation to this is, and this is called out in the report, and this also talks to the previous piece around recruitment and the candidate experience. But in May 2022, 1,000 applicants with the attrition rates that we have, so different points at which applicants fall out of a process, would have resulted in 345 candidates. So 1,000 applicants convert into 345 candidates. In April 2023, that same 1,000 applicants would have resulted in 160 successful applicants. So you can start to see over the course of just that 1 year how much harder we are having to work as an organisation in order to convert applications to successful police officer candidates. So what that starts to mean when we look at the numbers, so we've agreed that we're going to move to more frequent intakes for officers over this year. It then means that the teams need to get, you know, kind of double, 3 times the amount of applicants in order to fulfill the pipeline of officers. The only other pieces I would call out then is 2.1 has got a wealth of data in there, an insight around an overview of police officer recruitment. So this was from June 2021 to September 23. And what we can see there is 62% male, 38% female. And we can see within that time frame as well that the total number of recruits, 8.3% were black minority or white minority ethnic. That is against a backdrop of 4.1% of the Scottish population. In addition to that, we look at that overall that period, 6.4% of applicants identify within LGBT community, and that is against an ONS statistic of about 1.9% in the UK. So I know that there is more that we need to continue to do around the diversity of recruitment. But I think what I would say is when you look at the numbers in relation to external statistics and particularly the Scottish population and the diversity of the population that we are recruiting from, our statistics actually are not bad at all. Now, I'm not saying that's not good enough. There is always more we can do. The only other piece I would call out is 2.2 actually gives a very good overview of the attrition rates of candidates. So what that shows is that from shortlist through to all of the different stages that we would take people through to medical referral of where we are losing candidates. And you can see that from May 2022 to April 23. So for example, under medical deferral, you've seen in May 2022, 30% of candidates would have been lost at that point. That's gone up to 47% in April 23. So that starts to talk to my very first statistic about the number of candidates that we require in order to get successful offers. That medical uplift, if you like, would be very reflective, I think, of the Scottish population in terms of individuals who are taking medication related to mental health. So I think, Fiona, you're probably going to correct me, but I think that the statistic is 1 in 7 citizens at the moment, the thinking is would be taking some sort of medication for a psychological illness. So I guess I'm just trying to put some context here around some of the work. The last thing that I will call out is I know as an organisation, we talk about the PAT team. So the kind of the positive action team, that's 3 officers in that team. We cannot, as an organisation, expect 3 officers to be fixing all of this for us. All of us plays a part in this, all of us. And recruitment is just the first part of this. There's then the whole employee life cycle. So we've touched before about how we onboard people. What's the probationer training, the readiness, their first deployment? What's the experience of colleagues when they're working with us? What's their promotion? What's the career development? So this point of this report is just the very first point around the responsibility that each and every one of us has in relation to attracting but retaining the diversity of staff within our organisation. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Katie. And it's good to see this paper coming here and some of the very encouraging stats and data that we've got. Paul.
Yeah, I have to say I love reading stats.
You're a scientist.
And the thing is, what strikes me is the sustained performance is maybe the wrong word, but the sustained levels of BME, WME recruits that you've had, certainly since I've joined the board, which I think is to be welcomed. And I'm always reading across the census results and ONS results for Scotland and elsewhere. So I think the three officers you're mentioning that oversee this aspect have done very, very well with that. What I am concerned about, though, is, and I wanted also to touch on the remarks that you were saying about retention afterwards, because the attrition rates only talk about recruitment attrition rates, not attrition rates going forward, which is, having done the difficult bit of getting them through the door, how can we keep hold of more diverse staff more? What I am concerned about, though, is it's like a drop like a stone in terms of the percentage of women recruits from the 18th of April. So if it's gone below 40% from July onwards, and it just seems to be going down and down and down, and I do have a concern about that. What is the reason for that? Because it's we were 50% in June 2001, and it's now half of that in terms of percentage in last September. So is there something happening there we need to know about?
Yeah, we have tried to call this out in some of the conclusions, and I do think that there's more work that we need to do in relation to that. We had an independent person who undertook what we call a recruitment MOT. That's his product that he uses, and there was a wealth of insight from there in terms of his findings, some of which are around our brand in the employment market. So policing, not just Police Scotland, but policing generally, and that's not only as a job but also as a career, and how that looks and feels at the moment nationally. That's challenging. The other piece is within geographies, we will see different areas of competition for candidates. So Aberdeen is going to look different to Edinburgh, for example. And that's why in part I've come back to this time to recruit, particularly if we take Edinburgh market, a lot of financial services organisations, there are particular skills we are going to be in competition for. If we are taking 200+ days to turn around an offer, we have lost that candidate. We know that financial service institutes will do that in 4 weeks. So there's a piece there for us where we need to step up. We also know that we can start to see some of the nuances, for example, around the fitness days and what that might look like in terms of gender. There's pieces to do then around the medicine piece in the assessment, and to what extent that may or may not be impacting not only gender but also ethnicity, disability of candidates, etc. So there's a big piece there for us. And I do think it comes back to what policing is, that in terms of what we've touched on earlier around shift patterns. So I think it's a complex answer, Paul, that it's difficult to nail. But
they haven't all got worse in the last 3 years. And that's what concerns me, is 3 years ago, we managed a 50-50 recruitment of gender, and it hasn't got worse. And 38% is not the same as 50% of the population, which you'd expect. And we have a chief constable that's female, deputy chief constable that's female. That, that surely must at some stage, and it's early days, must at some stage be attractive. And that example there, you have positive role models there to build a career on.
Yeah. I think we need to do more on this to understand it. What we do know is that proportion of female applicants we have is proportionate to those that are getting through and successfully appointing. So actually that points to is not getting the attraction of the applicants in the first place. And and that's more work we need to do.
Yeah, that's my concern, because I go abroad to other countries and I see an awful lot of female police officers on the beat, etc. And so anyway, that's me, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. If we've got no one else, I have a couple of, I suppose, just following that up on the female candidates. I was curious in terms of 2.5 about the intention of saying, I wondered should I be concerned that there's an institutional discrimination point of view here? Are we rolling over and saying, well, women don't really want to come into the police force anyway, so we'll just leave it because, you know, it's the same but opposite in the NHS? I was interested to know the thought process behind the inclusion of the comparison to the NHS. Interested to know if you're going to learn from some of the active work that's taken, but also, is there actually it's okay for men to do it but not okay for women?
No, and that's definitely not the intention of including that. I think the intention of including that, so in the recruitment MOT, actually, perhaps if I can come back to that, there are a number of comparator organisations that the individual brought forward, and actually, in terms of even thinking about imagery that we use in our recruitment. So, you know, we've kind of got the stock pictures, if you like, but actually it's the language that we use as well. So he did a very nice piece of analysis that talked about the Navy, the Army, the NHS, education, and actually a lot of visual imaging and words that are being used. But in addition to that, also looked at things like, you know, how many click-throughs it takes a candidate to get to the information they want to get to. So, for example, if we know it's important that there's flexibility that's offered for female candidates, how quickly do we put that up front? So what I suppose what we're doing at the moment, together with the work from Emma Bond on tackling misogyny and sexism, is trying to pull through that insight to say, how is it then that we start to really position our brand? I think as an organisation, and I'm hoping I'm not going to get the number wrong, but I think we spent £40,000 last year on recruitment campaigns. That was it. You cannot, of an organisation of our size, expect us to be able to step forward with that brand, with the candidate experience, and to get the numbers that we need. You know, this is a really kind of, you know, specialist area of work in terms of recruitment and building campaigns, direct attraction, etc. So we have had agreements that we can apply for reform funding to try and increase that, because I think there's a huge amount of work. There's some really nice applications out there, tech applications, that will look at what candidates are reading on screens and what words they're dwelling on. And actually, what that then starts to tell you is what's important words and language for different diversity of candidates that are reading our information. And that's the competitive market that we're in at the moment, that as an organisation we need to step up and think about in terms of candidates.
And enabling pieces. So we've talked about flexibility. I think there's been not quite an undercurrent, but actually the whole issue, rightly so, we need to provide a service. But if 40% of the women in, whether warranted officer or Police Scotland staff, wanted to work 20 hours, then how are we going to backfill that? And how are we going to get, you know, more part-time workers into the organisation if we have your very clunky, well, it takes a year and everyone has to come and go to Tullyallen for 12 weeks away from their families and they have to do it full time? I'm just wondering, will that be something we'll see in the strategic workforce plan, Katie?
Well, we do talk in the strategic workforce plan. There are a number of commitments and outcomes in there, but I think the commitments in there for the first iteration of the SWP were more around understanding the current as is and what the dynamics are. Because I think as an organisation, you know, Emma's found it through her work that actually that start point has been discovery. So some of what we thought was driving, you know, some of what we're seeing, all the insights, actually isn't the case. It's something else completely different. So I know, Chair, it frustrates you when I say that, you know, we're still having to build this insight, but particularly in relation to recruitment, you know, I do think as an organisation, we do need to step back and think, you know, a multi-generational workforce requires us to be thinking really differently about our employment proposition. And perhaps we've stood still a little bit on, you know, it's 12 weeks at Tullyallen, it's full time, 200 plus days is fine, they'll wait. And actually, we just can't anymore. You know, there's kind of a fire under our feet now to say, you know, we really need to think about what that looks like. If we go out to universities or colleges or schools and we talk to, you know, a particular age demographic, what they want from an employer, and the research is showing us, is very, very different to, you know, kind of 40, 50, etc. What I would say, though, is the one thing that we have, which other organisations don't have, is that sense of purpose. So, you know, we see it across public sector, but policing has a unique sense of purpose that no other organisation except other forces can replicate. And that's the bit for us. If we can get that right, and we can really land on that compelling brand around why it's important, then actually that for me is one of the biggest attraction pieces that we have. Then we need to follow through with the colleague experience.
Okay, that's grand. I'm coming to an end of this. I would very much look forward to the assessment of health and well-being, the medical deferrals that we have in terms of making sure that it's been properly reviewed, and from an impact assessment point of view, particularly disability is taken into account. The fitness piece, two things. One, a lot of women are feeling their fitness, but the other aspect is, do we, once you're in, are you then assessing, just thinking about that multi-generational piece, does a level of fitness have to be maintained? So I'm asking, is the bar too high? And I don't have a view because I don't actually know what the fitness standards are. And also, do we have to keep, if we have a bar for recruitment, do we then keep that up for the 35 years of service? And I know you're going to tell me, Katie, that people don't want to work for the same employer for 35 years, and we need to get used to that. But for instance,
I am actually, as much as I know about the fitness test, is when I hear the bleep test happening in Tullyallen. If I can, I think Emma, ACC Bond, is still on the call. And I'm wondering, is she still on the call? Or she is. And I'm wondering whether or not Emma could speak to the fitness aspect and the ongoing requirements, if there are any. Thank you.
Yeah, so I have to be brutally honest here and say I don't know the specifics. So what I do know is that they have been reviewed to ensure that actually that they are far more aligned to what is appropriate, and that there isn't a sense that actually the standards far exceed, I suppose, a minimum level of fitness. What colleagues coming into the organisation are required to do is then show improvement over the course of their training, as opposed to necessarily there will be a minimum standard, but it's that improvement series over above time, as long as there's a minimum requirement met. And then again, just to reassure you in terms of the work under the sex equality, tackling and misogyny work that Emma Croft is leading in terms of sort of working practices, includes elements of fitness requirements, particularly in some of our specialisms, around actually how much of that is essential pre-entry requisite, or actually how much of those skills or requirements actually could be learnt or trained post joining, because quite often, and even then linking with Katie's team, thinking about how early we advertise, how early, so that people then can make informed decisions and start far enough in advance for somebody who, for example, post-maternity may not be as fit as somebody else may well be, or a male colleague, because they haven't had the ability to train, for example, and would like to, but our application window is too short. So it's around that timetable to enable people to make some of those informed decisions. So, but my understanding, as I say, is we do have a basic level, which then, as I say, it's improvement upon induction.
Okay, thank you. Rob, you're going to help us?
Yes, thanks. Sorry, as a relatively recent former head of training, if you're so minded, Chair, I could give you a little bit around about the fitness standard. So there is, as both the ACC and the Director have said, a common standard of 5.4 in the multi-stage fitness test, but that's only tested during probation, and they have to maintain that minimum standard throughout the probationary period. As long as that continues to be met, once an officer passes out of the probationary period as confirmed in the rank of constable, there is no further fitness testing unless they elect to take on a specialism that has fitness testing associated with it, such as firearms or public order. You might be interested to know that, so there is disproportionality around about 5.4 as a standard, in terms of that it's more likely to be failed by female officers than it is by male officers. And if you look in the wider UK policing context, some forces are looking at alternatives for a job-related fitness testing, and I understand that colleagues in LTD are looking at that potential shift in the Police Scotland context as well, although I think that's still a relatively early stage. But I guess the thing about having a single standard is one of it being a proportionate means of achieving a legitimate aim in terms of, what we're really testing is the ability for people to endure the physical rigours of the office of constable, and people will fight equally hard. In fact, some will fight even harder against female officers because they think there's a chance of potentially overcoming them. So there is a legitimate aim of making sure that everybody reaches a kind of common minimum standard around about that. But it is something that is given a great deal of consideration in the wider kind of UK policing circumstance around about job-related fitness testing.
Okay, that's helpful, and look forward to seeing that being carried through in what we're doing. Okay, if that is all, thank you very much for that. So that's been helpful, Katie, in terms of some of the really good work that was on in terms of how we recruit. I think the intention, and I look forward to seeing that continuing, and looking at the conversation we've had throughout the morning. We've had the HMICS review and culture, which I think is going to be incredibly important in helping all of this as well. So there's a number of factors that are going to contribute to continuing to improve once we've attracted people, and when we've attracted a more balanced intake, then how do we make sure we keep them? So I think that is us ending the public items, except I'm going to go back to the action notes, and what I was suggesting at the beginning of the meeting hasn't changed. So I'm more than happy for people to come and disagree with me in terms of policing together. I would like to keep ongoing. Sexism and misogyny, I would like to keep ongoing. Health and safety, I would like to keep ongoing in terms of surefire. In terms of people strategy, that's grand. In terms of that's closed. L&D strategy, I would like to have ongoing. Training, I would like to have ongoing and have a paper coming back to the next meeting on that. Health retirement is closed, grand. Recruitment and protected characteristics closed as well. Thank you very much. So if my board member colleagues are content with that proposal, I'm going to thank people for tuning in to the live stream, and we will go into private session now.